changing it from a top-down Whitehall knows best system to one where local communities not just have a voice but actually have the power to take action. So what we're doing in the localism bill and the whole thrust of government policy in this area is really very much at the heart of what Liberal Democrats want to achieve, right at the top of the agenda. Finding out what is the neighbourhood, who are the community, who are the people who are going to be ready to take up cudgels on behalf of local areas. No, I don't think there's a conflict. I think that what we've had in the past is an attempt to impose on local communities a central government model of what should happen through the planning system and using other mechanisms as well. And the regional spatial strategies were perhaps the classic example of that. And the higher the house building targets set in the regional spatial strategies, the harder local communities fought against them, and the less was built. So we actually need a completely different model of economic growth, which is driven by local communities saying, hey, we want some of that, rather than not in my backyard. The localism bill has got the right to challenge local authorities about the provision of services. I think there'll be plenty of parish councils that get frustrated about the fragmentation of district services. It might be as simple a thing as the grass cutting. I had a splendid example in my own area where the highways cut a bit of the grass, and the housing department cut another bit of the grass, and the recreation cut another bit of the grass, and they never could get their act together to get one lawnmower instead of three. And I think that's a sort of example which will ring true to a lot of your readers and viewers. And parishes are going to be in a very good position to go to their principal councils and say, hang on a minute, we could do that better. And instead of it being one of those discussions where computers say no, it will be their right to push that challenge forward. So I think that's one area. The listing of assets of community value, I think, is going to be something that many parishes will want to see. That it's going to be a bit like the current listing system, where if it's got cultural and heritage value, you can get a building listed, and that means that you can't just demolish it or alter it without giving consideration to that. There's going to be a similar list of assets of community value where they fulfill an important community function. It might be the chemist shop, it might be the doctor's surgery, it could be the pub, and to put those on a list which will be published and available. And that means that if somebody, the owner of that building, decides to shut the pub or demolish close the post office, whatever it might be, there'll then be a window of opportunity for the local community to say, hang on, we can put together some partners here and we'll run it ourselves, or we'll find somebody else who can take it over, so that you can preserve it. So I think that's going to be something that's really it's completely new, and I think it will be something which, again, town and parish councils will want to use and exploit on behalf of their communities. Well, what we've got at the moment is a hierarchy of plans, so that the regional spatial strategy trumps the district plans, or for that matter, the county plans, and they in turn can trump any planning aspirations of the parish. The parish has to fit in with that plan. We're changing that round. There won't be the regional structural plans. There'll be a national planning policy framework, an NPPF, and there will be district plans, which, if you like, are not really changing. But there will be much stronger and more powerful neighbourhood plans, and the district plan will have to accommodate those neighbourhood plans. It won't any longer be possible to simply say, well, that's interesting, but we're doing it a different way. Well, we obviously want to see parishes who are effective and who not just sort of organisationally effective, but also effective at representing their communities. And yeah, we strongly support what you might call a self-regulation to achieve that. And I'm sure we'll continue to show that support. London is the only place in the country where there is no provision for making parish councils, but just to deal with the rest of the country, the existing provision for the creation and changing of parishes is not being changed by the Localism Bill, and so it will continue to be the case that new parish councils can be formed outside of London. We did take some soundings about extending the power to create parishes in London, and I have to say there was a marked lack of appetite, and in a bill which already had 200 clauses and a huge range of reforms, we didn't proceed with that proposal in the bill. I think London can now create parishes in certain, in certain circumstances, but I mean, again, the ball is very much in the hands of local communities and local boroughs, London boroughs, for instance, as to whether they receive a petition requesting a parish and what they do about that. And there is a statutory route for proceeding, which clearly they would be welcome to do. We would not be obstructing anybody who wanted to form a parish. But we're not making any change to the existing mechanism for creating parish councils, and there's a democratic way of changing a local authority's view, and that is for local voters to change their representation and to make it so that that council changes its policy, and that's the way that we think accountability should be exercised. In other words, accountability from the bottom up, not accountability pressing on from above. Well, the first thing to say is we're not creating a big society out of thin air. What we're saying with the big society is that we want every part of the country to have communities and neighbourhoods which can fulfil their aspirations, which can develop their skills, and perhaps in the first place have the ambition to prosper. Now, of course, in many town and parish areas, as I said at the beginning, the foundations for that are already in place. There is a vehicle, perhaps not a completely perfect vehicle, but a very strong vehicle in the parish council and the town council itself for building that community capital, for engaging people in civic and community affairs, and for promoting the sustainability of that community. Obviously the environmental issues will be quite high on the agenda, but so also ought to be the social issues, the need for social cohesion, for working together despite all our differences, and of course the economic sustainability as well. But I'm sure every town and parish council wants to be prosperous and to have residents who are prosperous. The Localism Bill will take away the power for capping of council tax, and will say that the decision to have a large rise in council tax is one that has to be signed off by voters in a referendum, but not one that has to be signed off by the Secretary of State. We've looked carefully at how that works for parishes, and we've introduced some we are introducing some changes to the Localism Bill and the Code of Practice that will go with it to reflect the fact that spending by town and parish councils is quite often lumpy. That's to say, it's not smooth from year to year because money is raised for special projects and so on. And that means that sometimes you could have a very high percentage rise, even though the amount of money that was raised was quite small. So we had a lot of representations, quite rightly, from parish councils at the time that we hadn't got that quite right, and we've reflected on that, and we're introducing rules which will mean that although if you had a parish budget which year on year went up by a large amount, you would find that you would have to get a referendum. We have taken account of the lumpy spending of parish councils. Well, I think it's worth considering why they don't at the moment, and there are several different reasons, obviously, but one of the reasons is that people don't think it makes very much difference if they vote. It doesn't make very much difference if they do it and take an active part. And obviously we think we're fixing that problem because we're going to give far more power back to the neighbourhood level. I would guess a lot of people will get engaged at the point when a neighbourhood plan is being discussed. Surely everybody who writes about planning applications will want to get their hands on how the neighbourhood plan is drawn up, and that means that I think the most effective thing for anybody getting engaged in local politics is thinking that somebody else is doing a really bad job and you want to fix it. I think that a lot of the provisions here will generate that kind of local excitement even. You can think about that in terms of, you know, what services would the community want to take over and run. The listing, all of those things are things where people say, hang on a minute, they're making a mess of that. I think I could do better. Well, I certainly don't think the government's got a view about that. The government thinks it's entirely right for each local area to take a view, and for people who live in that area to take a view about how they promote candidates and so on. There's no government policy on party politics. The reality is that I think if one looked around, one would find that the larger the town and parish council and the bigger the budget, the more likely it is to find that there are party political candidates standing, and that's probably because if you like, there are bigger issues at stake and sharper controversies about what the priorities should be, and that tends to be reflected in a greater level of party political engagement. But it's certainly not the government's view that there ought to be either more or less of it. Well, you see, there's an interesting case. I live in a metropolitan borough. We have only one parish council. It was created in 1998 as one of John Prescott's new urban parishes. It comprises of a housing estate which is entirely surrounded by a socially rented housing estate which is entirely surrounded by owner-occupied unparished areas. So it's a rather exceptional sort of parish, and it has proved to be quite difficult to get the right levels of participation and civic engagement with that parish. So I don't think I would want to say that I thought that was a typical or characteristic case at all.